Oh yeah, great. I coughed just as we come on live. Hi, this is Meg Riley, and you've joined us for another episode of The VUU. And I'm delighted to be in Boston today. I'm sitting here in one of the phone booths at 24 Farnsworth. Michael, say hey.
Good morning, everyone. This is Michael Tino joining you from Peekskill, New York. It's good to be back after a couple weeks of other things interfering.
And Jessica is out from behind the chalice this morning. Jessica, want to introduce yourself?
I am Jessica Star Rockers. I'm doing tech this morning from the Seattle, Washington area. And I'm on Twitter and I'm in the YouTube chat. So send me any questions or comments or anything you have and I'll send that along to the hosts.
And I'm excited that today we're joined by an old friend, Rus Funk, whom I knew when we both lived in DC a long time ago. He has been working in the field of domestic abuse, violent men, what's now called toxic masculinity, for decades, literally, in all kinds of different ways. And I'm really excited. We started working on this show months ago, but it keeps being timely. It keeps being really timely week after week. So I'm really excited. Rus now lives in Louisville, Kentucky, where he's a consultant and also active in his local congregation. So, hey, Rus.
Good morning. I appreciate the invite.
Yeah. Well, why don't you just start by kind of doing a longer introduction of yourself, talk about how you got into this work and what you've been doing and what you've observed. I mean, I'm thinking about it. I mean, I met you, must be 25 years ago, and you were already doing this work, and I think you've stuck with it pretty much. So, you know, I'd love to hear kind of your own evolution with the work a little bit.
Well, thanks. Yes, I got started as an undergraduate student in Texas back in the mid '80s, and my introduction into this whole area was in an introductory to social work class, where we were tasked to go find some place to volunteer. The thinking was social work is not a conceptual degree; it is a practical degree. So go practice. And I, long story short, I ended up volunteering at the local Domestic Violence and Rape Crisis Center at the same time that I was living in an all-men's dorm at 18. And the confluence of having my consciousness raised about rape and domestic violence and how that impacts on women's lives, not just the actual violence, but the threats that are ever looming, with living in a all-men's dorm of 18, 19, 20-year-old boys, men, whatever we are at that age, deepened my understanding in ways that I don't think it could have been any other context. And so I started noticing that you know, as much as I like being an advocate and as I think I'm good at working with people who've been victimized, my real opportunity and my real work is actually working with the men who think of themselves as good men, working in environments that think of themselves as healthy environments, but allow behaviors or tolerate attitudes that are bad for women, are bad for our environment, and ultimately are bad for us as men. And as you said, yes, I've stuck with it. I've been in Washington, D.C. and now Louisville, and we continue to do the work.
So I want to come in on the good men thing, because I'm hearing a lot of, like yesterday, someone said to me, I thought Matt Lauer was a good guy. And I feel like that is not a helpful way to talk about this whole thing with the good men and the bad men, just like, you know, racists are bad, therefore none of us want to be racist. You know, that kind of binary thinking of you're either racist or you're not, you're either, you know, and I'm not saying that there aren't things that are really rotten things to do to other human beings, but can you talk about the kind of individualizing of these issues versus the systemic nature of them, or how you talk about all that?
Absolutely. I think that is so critical. And I totally agree that the framing of this as those horrible men is not helpful, because A, they're not horrible men. I have every reason to believe that Matt Lauer is a very decent man in a whole lot of ways, who apparently did some atrocious things. So one of the things that we know about sexual harassment and sexual assault more broadly is that men need some things in order to be able to do those things. And what they need to be able to perpetrate sexual harassment or assault is an idea, an image of what that is. They need permission. They need to give themselves permission. They need absolutely zero sympathy or empathy with the women that they're assaulting, and they need to firmly understand that their accountability is low. that the chances of them getting caught and the chances of them actually being punished is low to non-existent. Those things are systemic. The way that men lose our empathy for women is not inherent in us as human beings. We are born naturally empathetic. Our boys are wonderfully empathetic with each other across race lines and with girls, but it is systematically beaten out of them. Think about the bullying behaviors that happen when boys are 8, 9, 10. The evidence suggests very clearly that the most severe bullying happens to boys who are most friendly with girls in those ages. And it doesn't just happen from other boys their ages. It happens in their schools. As a concrete example, my son, who's 8, and I'm not biased at all, but he's gorgeous, and he has long blonde hair, and there's something about him that when another kid is struggling, Kieran will very gently sidle up next to him and kind of like, I got you today. And he doesn't use that language. He is 8, but just kind of attend to that person, that child, boy or girl, black, white, whatever. He's just going to be your friend for today. Not long ago in his public school, he was taunted as a girl, as a put down. Now, on the individual level, we in our household, girl is not a put down. So, as a person of privilege, you get to jujitsu that response and say, yeah, girls rock. Thank you. I'm loving this. But on the systemic level, how are we still allowing girl to be used as a put down in our public schools in the year 2017? That's a systemic issue. If girl is a put down, that lays this foundation to where we as boys are not supposed to be empathetic with girls. It's like the dirt. It's a slur that is dirt that we shove off our shoe. That's a systemic issue. And so the problem of sexual harassment is better addressed as a systemic issue than these problems of these individual men who don't know how to behave. That may have been a bit of a long-winded answer, but...
No, it's a good answer. And I see Jessica, who has a son of a similar age, nodding profusely. Jess, did that bring something up for you?
Yeah, I mean, my son, is being raised as a UU kid. He's 9 years old, and he's, what you're talking about your son experiencing, mine has as well. And it just hit home, it's a struggle for him just to be who he is, which is a caring, sensitive person. Like that hurts, to think about that
Mm-hmm.
for him is a struggle to be a caring, sensitive person in his day-to-day life. Like he has to build himself up regularly to, as a boy, mm-hmm. live out that truth in the world. And mm-hmm. that's just opposite of how it should be for boys, I think,
Mm-hmm.
Well, and these messages are so insidious, even from really young ages. I mean, my daughter is 4, and she's been in preschools, in the 3-year-old classroom, where when boys exhibit violent behavior, they're excused for it. I mean, they're 3 years old. Like, they understand like what they get away with, because that's what, like, being 3 is about, testing boundaries of what they can get away with, right? So, like, the boys can get away with things because they're boys, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I raised a kid off the binary the whole way through, who's now 21. So I got to see how differently people perceive this child depending on the gender that they assign to the child. And it was really interesting, I have to say. One of the things that was true at UU circles, I always knew when Jai had passed as a boy, because in coffee hour, someone would come up to me and go, I had to meet Jai's mother. What an amazing kid. Oh my God, he helped clean up. He did, stuff that was completely normal for any girl their parent would not have been congratulated for this. And I absolutely knew after a while. At first I was like, yes, Jai is amazing. And then I figured out, no, you're saying this would be remarkable for a 6-year-old, a 5-year-old boy. But if I had a daughter, it would have been a problem if they hadn't cleaned up and been super helpful and all of that. So yeah, I agree. And I'll say that this, different stuff, which, you know, here I am, this radical feminist with a 3-year-old who only pretends to be a boy and pretend games and stuff. And I find myself thinking, oh, I've got to give this kid more space. Like, if it's a boy, I shouldn't hug them so much. I should, and it's like, oh my God, that's in me. This system of belief isn't just out there somewhere. I'm a carrier of this, and it is toxic to women as well as to men, and to all genders, to women, to men, to people off the binary, to trans people. And we see it really focusing on women and off the binary folks and trans people. So Russell, what have you seen that actually works to, I mean, you got enlightened, but how do you see men actually, you know, seeing the water that the fish are swimming in? Because I'm not seeing a lot of that myself.
Well, and that's part of the challenges, because, you know, there are real benefits to men continuing to live in this toxicity. You know, we get elected president, we get elected governor, we get hired on as CEO. And in fact, it is extremely unlikely that we're going to experience those kinds of really, really tactical benefits if we don't live in the toxicity and actually revel in it. So that's a real challenge of how do we, one, get men to notice that the sea they're swimming in is toxic, and two, encourage men to give up what are very, very real and concrete privileges. In terms of what's working, I think part of it is leaning into men's inherent empathy and their desire to be decent human beings. That is real too. And my experience is that when concretely and directly asked, do you want to be the kind of guy who treats women like that? Or do you want to be the kind of guy who's a decent human being to women? Most men choose the latter. There are a few that are outliers, but most men really do want to be decent human beings. That's in our that's what's in our DNA. This other crap, that's in the sea. But in our DNA, we want to be decent human beings, and we want to be safe doing it. And as Jessica, you described, and what I'm starting to experience, in most of the environments that we create, it is not safe for men to practice being decent human beings. We get hurt, we get bullied, we get taunted, we get our asses kicked. And so what appears to work, and this is mostly coming from the efforts in the Global South, is, again, rather than, or in addition to teaching individual boys and individual men, how do you lean into your natural state of being, the collective work is how do we create environments that support men to be in those, to live that way.
It seems like,
or I should say, male type people.
I mean, this is different in every cultural environment, but it seems like there's something about masculinity in America, in white America, that's particularly violent. And I mean, looking at it intersectionally with racism and everything else that is our legacy. I mean, how do you, I mean, do you see that? I mean, I know that there are definite forms of horrible masculinity in other cultures, but I don't know them. So I want to talk about the culture I know. How do you see those feeding each other? Because they certainly, and I'm not saying that only white men are sexually violent or anything like that, but I'm saying that this ideal and this system that is coming down on us feels rooted in racism as well as misogyny to me constantly. And it's about power, I think.
I think it's about power. I think it's about privilege. I think it's about entitlement. I think, yes, if one pays attention, it's noteworthy that the people who are being fired right now, consistently, the people who are being called out, the men who are being called out right now, are pretty much all white. If we think about it, you know, and I think part of that is the system of racism that has locked men out of some of those positions of power and dominance, Black and brown men, from those positions in order to be able to do what some of these white men have done. Not to say that Black and brown men are any less likely to do it. It's just there is a different layering. on the plus side, one of the things, and this is my switch around in terms of trying to answer your question. One of the things that we're doing locally is, so on the plus side, there are some really good efforts, primarily started during the Obama president. Brother Help Thyself, which is predominantly Black and brown men working with Black and brown men. My Brother's Keeper, again, predominantly a program working with Black and brown men to work with Black and brown men, which are really critical. And what they inadvertently reinforce is that the well-being of Black and brown men is separate and distinct from the well-being of white men. That is artificial and that is dangerous in my mind. And so part of what we're doing locally, what I'm doing with those two initiatives locally is what are the campaigns that bring in my health and well-being is integrally linked to your health and well-being as Black and brown men. And oh, by the way, to Black and brown women's too. So it's kind of bringing in the showing up for racial justice model around masculinity that are, and this is something that, you know, to me is a UU principle. It's a core principle of who we are, understanding that I am my best when I am working to help other people be their best. And particularly for me, when I'm noticing those people who are the most othered of the others, if that makes sense. So, you know, yes, I need to work with other white folks, but I also need to pay particular attention that I'm not just working with other white folks. I'm also working with the other Black and brown folks who are struggling right now.
So, so go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, I think that the, you know, raising a kid who is race aware and you know, making sure that our particularly white boys growing up are aware of privilege and race and aren't afraid to pay attention to it and talk about it and be compassionately race aware, I think is huge. And I think, you know, just to bring that back around to what we were talking about before with young boys, just that feels to me like a really critical part of raising compassionate white men.
Absolutely.
I was going to say Ann Burns, one of our viewers. Hey, Ann, wondered about men holding men accountable. And Russ, I know that's a lot of the work that you've done. Can you describe, and I understand we're just really honored to be made the U.S. representative to a global community of men working with men, the name of which is escaping me at the minute, but you'll tell us. And
I will.
Maybe even tell us a link that Jess can post for other people interested in it. But where do you see, and also like, say there are people wondering locally how they could get involved with good initiatives?
Okay, so there's a lot of questions there. Let me go in order as I heard them. So the question of men holding other men accountable, I think that is critical in terms of this work, and not holding other men accountable in shamey, blamey kind of ways, which reinforce what you started with in terms of those bad people, or I thought Matt Lauer was a good guy, but in the way that we all have experienced being held accountable that has been meaningful, which is to put equal emphasis on holding the person and the accountability. You know, I am most accountable to people who I know trust and respect me. Sometimes it's in my face. Sometimes it is very direct. Russ, you are being a real jerk right now. You need to cut it out. But it's in a relationship of people who care and trust me, and who I know when they get to that point, I'm really being a jerk. And whatever in my own denial and my own sexism or racism is blocking me from being able to see how much of a jerk I'm being. It's usually a different four-letter word, but you know, whatever. And so I think stepping away from that notion of I have to call him out and distance myself from those evil people, but in a way that actually draws other men in. The other thing that I think is really critical is developing. So what we have in place right now is most men know how to hold each other accountable once they've engaged in the extreme kind of red flag behaviors. And we really haven't developed a culture of men holding each other accountable to those orange and yellow flag behaviors. And that's part of the work that needs to happen too. So, when I'm in a locker room, and let me give this as a real example. This is a couple of years ago in downtown YMCA in Louisville, Kentucky. And this guy, I had my workout. I came out of the shower. Right behind me was this man with his small group of friends. And he, the most vocal of the three, outed himself pretty quickly as a lawyer who defended men who'd been accused of domestic violence. They ended up being in the same row of lockers for me, not arm's length from me. And lawyer guy took about 30 seconds to talk about the men, and immediately then, in an all men's locker room, started going after the women who accused these poor men of domestic violence. And he was in an all men's locker room, and he was a lawyer, and these were adult men, but you can probably imagine where that conversation started to go. Now, here's a yellow flag or orange flag situation where a lot of men feel empowered or don't feel completely disempowered to do or say anything. So, they didn't like what he was saying, so they ignored it and moved on. Where is the environment? Where's the empowerment that we empower men to say, we like women. That's not acceptable for you to stay here. So that's on the one step, it's those individual actions. And on the other step is, again, how do we create environments that this is the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association. And so on the back end, I was able to go to them and say, this goes on. That men say these things in your locker room, in the hallways, in the gym itself, talking trash about women. How is this in keeping with your self-defined Christian values? And so let's create an environment that is really clear. In this gym, we do not talk about women like that. If you want to talk about women like that, you're welcome to go to a different gym. And so we put some language into the contract that people sign up when they join the gym. Here we're going to respect women, and this is the expectation. Now we know that people don't read the contract when they join the Y. They sign up, they pay their money, and when they go upstairs. But it's another layer of holding them accountable. We helped them develop a Y-specific social marketing campaign that was really clear. Here's the values of the YMCA. One of those values is we respect each other. And so when you're in the hallway, when you're in the locker room, we demand that this is how you're going to talk about women if you feel the need to talk about women in this space. So that's an example of systemically how do we create environments that hold men accountable. In terms of the Men Engaged Alliance and ways people can get involved, I'm one of the co-founders of, so let me back up. The Global Men Engaged Alliance is an international alliance of, I believe it's 9 regional networks of efforts to engage and mobilize men to promote women's human rights. I'm a co-founder of the North American Men Engaged Network, which is, as the name suggests, those efforts in the United States and Canada. And as you said, yes, last week I was selected to be the North American liaison with the Global Men Engaged Alliance. Yes, I'm very humbled. And people can go to the North American Men Engaged Network website, which is namen.menengage.org, and find and we can help you connect with initiatives in your local state or community. The Global Men Engaged Network, menengage.org, has really some fabulous and amazing examples of some of the things that men are doing in 3 key areas: promoting men in caregiving and responsible fathering, promoting reproductive and sexual health and rights, and ending men's violence against women and girls. And what we're seeing is, particularly in the global South, is some actual movement happening. There are examples that, and Meg, I've been saying this for years, that until men are as engaged in the game of promoting women's human rights as women are, we're not going to be able to move the needle so much. Not to disempower women or dismiss the amazing stuff that women individually and collectively have done, but we as men still are in the power seats. What we're finding is the actual evidence to demonstrate that when men get involved, we see some change. And so there's actually countries where they're starting to see a reduction in the incidence of domestic and sexual violence, as an example. We're actually seeing some countries where fathers' roles and some very traditionally patriarchal countries where men embracing their caregiving nature is increasing dramatically. So progress is being made.
Well, and I just wanted to sort of go back to the idea of men holding men accountable and just lift up that, for any like women who are watching, and, the idea of a woman sort of policing her response to trauma or, to holding a man accountable, to me is that's sort of the subtext of men holding men accountable, is that women who have suffered abuse should not be expected to be the ones to worry whether they're pointing out one man as bad or whatever. You know what I mean? I think that that's an unfair expectation on women who are in a state of trauma, and I think that the trauma right now that we're seeing is systemic, right? It's just as systemic as the problem. So I think that's one reason why it's super important for men to be the ones to step up in that way.
Mm-hmm. And I would argue that in this moment, there is a real need for us as men to step up in terms of owning our stuff. The incident of sexual harassment and sexual assault is so pervasive that, quite honestly, none of us are free. And I think there's time for us as men to have a really honest, very transparent dialogue, as modeled by the #MeToo campaign, around how have I contributed? How have I perpetrated harassment? How have I contributed to environments that other men can perpetrate harassment? Because I'm going to argue that every man on the planet has done one of the two, probably on a fairly consistent basis. And
but
women can acknowledge.
Russ, not UUs, I'm sure. It just never happens in UU circles. Can you talk a little bit about how liberal misogyny manifests that might be different? Because I do see UUs being like, those people over there. And, as it keeps hitting close, I mean, I'm from Minnesota, so we've got Al Franken, and now we've got Garrison Keillor, and Al Franken's a lot more upsetting to me than Garrison Keillor, but I think I do see liberals thinking it is only conservatives that do this, and I think the Me Too campaign is like, no, it crosses all these different lines. But have you noticed patterns in the way that liberal misogyny is different? It might be something you haven't spent your time on, but I'm curious.
Not so much. I think one of the things that comes to mind that are more, I don't know if it's more liberal or more subtle, less paid attention to, is us deciding that we get to speak for women's experiences, and kind of elbowing women out of the way in order for us to show how much we know. But I think there's also a lot of ways that it's very similar. And well, as we're thinking about it, as I'm thinking about it, one of the differences I do see, and this might be a hot button issue, what the hell, is around the issue of pornography. And I have a hard time understanding how men who view pornography, and tolerate men's viewing of pornography, how that anything in pornography is sharing messages around gender respect and gender equality and gender justice and sexual justice that we hold dear. And I get a lot more pushback from liberal men around those linkages than I do from conservative men. Now, conservative men tend to make different connections with pornography that I struggle with and find differently problematic. But that wholesale defense of pornography, and to some degree women in quote unquote sex work, shifting the focus on women's rights to do that, as opposed to what I believe the real conversation needs to be, is what is it, if we have said, what does it say about how men are tolerated to view or treat women if we say it's okay for men to buy women and use them however they want to sexually? That I don't want to open up a third conversation area, but
that's a loaded conversation.
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I think, you know, in my experience, I've experienced a whole lot of, you know, what I would call male fragility, using sort of the parallel to Robin DiAngelo's white fragility, that at least the liberal men that I know are very invested in seeing themselves as good people, and admitting that we've been complicit in a culture that systematically devalues women and non-binary and transgender people. You know, we take it personally and get defensive about that, and rather than just saying, yeah, you know what, we were brought up in this system, right? So, and we need to learn how to be better together. So I think that, you know, it's interesting to hear you talk about encouraging men to own that, because I think it's true, but I think we need to do it in a way that is not then seeking the blessing of women for thank you for owning that, you must be such a good person kind of solution that I see going on, right? So I think we need to own it in male company in a certain way.
I think that's really, I'm thinking again of raising this child who said to me at age 6, Mom, you don't understand. There's this thing and you're just not part of it. When I'm a boy, every girl wants to either be my mother or my wife, and they all take care of me, and no one's taking care of you like that. And I said, well, you know, there's a sisterhood thing going on. Jai's like, no, it is nothing like this. And I was like, well, it probably isn't, and I never will know. But that tendency of women that we're socialized into taking care of male fragility is so deep and so profound. And again, that's how the system is kind of messing us all up. And, you know, it's like that thing of lesbians being man haters, because lesbians aren't paying attention to men at all. So to not pay attention to men must be hating them, because women owe their attention to men, right? So yeah, it's deep and it's wide. And Russ, I'm curious, because you've been at this for so long and you've seen a whole new generation come into leadership now with different ways of being around gender. Certainly, like this gender revolution's amazing that that we're coming through around getting off the binary. And I'm wondering, because some of it seems so new and so exciting, and some of it seems so boring and so relentlessly, consistently just same old, you know, just new variations on the same old themes of male power. So I'm curious if you've seen that the kind of gender revolution going on having a corollary revolution about relinquishment anywhere.
That's a really good question. I don't. What I see is a much higher level of recognition amongst younger men. I'm not seeing the relinquishment. I do think significantly more common understanding that sexism is real and male privilege is real, and, you know, ownership of that. But turning it over is, I haven't seen so much. And, you know, I hope that that's part of the process. And, you know, maybe Jessica, your son and my son will be part of that, wave of figuring out how to actually turn this over.
So what are you working on now? What are you doing?
Well, one of the things that I am very excited about is I've got a project going that we're going to try and pilot this spring that integrates some. It expands the conversation around a healthy voice, and so it's for elementary school or elementary age professionals, teachers and whatnot, on how to create an environment that our boy type people can show up in whatever that looks like. Recognizing that at first, even at these young ages, 6 through 10, 6 through 11, boys are still wonderfully nurturing and gentle and kind and have that connectivity with each other, but they're also starting to experience boy privilege. And as Jessica indicated, that intersection with white privilege, at least in my town here in Louisville. And so how do we create spaces as the adult in the room to help them challenge that and both lean into their full sense of wholeness and health and healthfulness, being able to be gentle and kind, being able to cry without being shamed, being able to be attentive to other people, being able to be nurturing, as well as attending to the ways that male privilege shows up at 6, 7, 8-year-olds. So what that concretely means is a 2-day training that we're going to provide to elementary age professionals, and then follow up kind of work around the environment where we'll go in and we'll help them assess the environment to take a look at what does it actually look like, and then a strategic plan to work with them on how to shift the environment. So we'll have teachers who are, I keep saying teachers because that's going to be probably where the pilots are going to exist, is in schools. Teachers who are better trained on how to attend to these dynamics, as well as environments that support it in different ways.
Can you give some examples about the dynamics? I mean, the one that comes to me automatically, having been a teacher, is realizing, again, my radical feminist self gave the boys a lot more attention because they demanded it. So I'm assuming that's one, is kind of sharing airspace. What kind of thing? I mean, what can you say to a 7-year-old? I'm just curious.
Well, it's sharing airspace. It's when already what we're seeing already, and this is supported by the data, there's this assumption that boys are going to start checking out of school, and so particularly for Black boys, so there's this reactive response to boys in elementary school who like school and are like participating in school, that we support that by paying them even more attention. Again, at the expense of the girls who are doing what they do anyway. Same thing with nurturance. You know, that you describe your child. When boys show that nurturant quality that is inherent in them, they get a whole different kind of praise than girls do at that age. In terms of talking with 7 and 8-year-olds, a lot of it at those ages is just about modeling. And so making sure that the stories that we read to them during story time include, and they're hard to find, I have to acknowledge, but reading books that not only show girls in empowered and strong ways, but show boys or men in gentle, attentive, nurturing ways. The movies that we're trying getting into the schools, Disney has done a really great job of expanding, showing models of empowered and powerful girls, and they still pretty much suck at showing men and boys in anything other than a hypermasculine way. And so either showing them, modeling them, or pointing out to the children as you're reading the story, as you're watching the movie, how these are problematic, and starting to kind of tweak that critical consciousness. Because what we know about what the literature suggests about boys at that age is that they are inherently curious, and they start to wonder, why are all of the male characters in this thinly sliced model, when for more of them in this generation, their lived experiences that men are have much more depth than that. Children are naturally curious, and so they're going to start making questions, and unless adults help them to come up with the conclusions, they'll make up their own. That answer your question, or evade it?
No, that's good. Huh. Any other questions? I know Ann Burns also asked about permission. I'm not sure what she's saying there. Permission from a systemic perspective. Permission, I guess, for hypermasculinity and violence. But I kind of think you talked about that.
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah.
Is the organization that I put up, this is the Men Engage, is that something that men can get involved in? Is that something they can, like if they follow that link, is that something that will provide them some resources if they want to educate themselves a little bit?
Yes, both the Global Men Engage website, through the Global Men Engage website, you can access the North American Men Engage network. That's probably for viewers or listeners in the US and Canada, that's probably going to be your best, most concrete connection, because there you'll be able to find if there are groups or efforts that we may know of that are also in your areas. There's several states in the United States that are doing really good state level organizing. Minnesota, Meg, you mentioned that. Minnesota is doing some fabulous work with their statewide organizing. Nebraska is just starting to do some work. Arizona, Texas, Massachusetts are all doing really good statewide organizing. And then there's a number of communities that have community-based efforts.
What does really good statewide organizing mean? They're organizing to change laws. They're organizing to do respite care. I mean, all kinds of stuff.
It varies widely. A lot of what the good statewide work looks like is helping to foster the community-based efforts, because that's where the change happens, right? It's good community organizing starts at the neighborhood level. So from the state, it's how do we funnel down and support the development of these efforts that men can connect with in their communities. But in other cases, in Georgia, for example, there's some really good work on organizing men in terms of changing state policy and having men show up on legislative advocacy days to talk about issues that are stereotypically defined as women's issues. And what they're finding is that it's changing the dialogue a little bit.
That's really interesting. What do you think what could a UU congregation, like, who wants to do something about this, where would you suggest that they start?
I think there's two things that UU, at least, that a UU congregation could start with. One is to, particularly if they happen to have a male minister, to encourage speaking out from the pulpit around the value of men and the role of men in supporting women's human rights and taking an active stance in pushing this forward. The other is to, if there are efforts in your community, to figure out ways to support them. Every community has a rape crisis center or domestic violence agency that is connected, probably have access to a Planned Parenthood. They are all looking for volunteers and supporters. There's some lots and lots of examples that you can find on the NAMN website around ways that men can provide concrete resources to help domestic violence or rape crisis centers or Planned Parenthoods. One example is there's a group in Dallas that on a regular basis, roughly monthly, a group of men provide a barbecue for the women and children in the shelter. And they go in, they cook, they provide the meal, and it gives a monthly touch point for the children in the shelter to have a different connection with men that they probably have limited access to. And it provides a different relationship with the women. So I think there's a whole lot of things that are within reach of men and boys within UU communities that can make a significant difference.
I think it would be nice to hear us talking more about how our Unitarian Universalist theology also asks people to be in the world in a way that is not the one we were brought up in. To like actually make that connection explicit in our congregation.
Yes. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Russ, anything I didn't ask you that you wish I had?
Not that comes to mind. I think this has been a really wide-ranging conversation, so I think it was pretty good.
Well, there's a lot of ground to cover, and it's not something we talk about so much. So I think one upshot of all of the stuff going on is that more conversations are happening.
Yes.
Who does resources to frame good conversations about this? Because I see a lot of social media really not helpful conversations going on. At least they don't help me any. Like, is there somebody an organization that you know of that really focuses on how to get people to talk about this stuff? Or is that still on the NAMN website? Or
actually, that's a really good point. Nothing comes to mind yet about how to have these conversations. I think, is it Michael? I think, as you kind of alluded to, or maybe you said outright, there's a role often for us as men to just listen and not feel like we have to have a response or a defense. And sometimes the best thing for us to do is to just really keep our lips shut and listen deeply to the conversations that are going on around us. I think another point that you made was to have these honest conversations with each other, without women in the room, without the grandstanding for women's attention, of how does this really impact our lives? One exercise that I find really helpful with men is it's kind of a more real life walk a mile in her shoes than the walk a mile in her shoes experience that tends to go around. So what we do is we ask men to identify a woman that they know and respect and care about, and then follow her through a public space, follow her through the mall, follow through a parking lot, follow her through downtown Minneapolis or wherever you are. And your job as the man is to notice how other men look at her, make gestures, make comments. Just pay attention to the street harassment, basically. As men, we rarely have the opportunity to know how pervasive and how extreme street harassment is for almost every woman who walks on the planet. And then come back and let's talk about, what was that like for you to experience how much that goes on? How many of us as men have maybe really intentionally saying to a woman that we know, sort of, wow, you look really nice today, and didn't get the response that we wanted because she's been spent the last 7 blocks being harassed, that she's had enough. And so those kinds of experiences that we can go through that kind of shift our experience and our lens, and then having a conversation with each other about it, can be really powerful in starting to shift some of the needles.
Well, thanks so much, Russ. It's a great conversation. Really appreciate launching it, and I hope we'll have more, because this is just, one conversation about something that we're all encountering from so many directions so often. Next week, we're talking about human rights. It's International Human Rights Day, and Michael, you've got a friend coming, right?
Yeah, I'm very pleased to be bringing onto the show my friend Ian Leakis, who, among other things, works in international LGBTQ human rights and runs a podcast called Radio Free Qtopia, where he is interviewing LGBTQ human rights activists around the world and having them tell their stories, especially to an audience that has been so focused on LGBTQ people in the United States. He's bringing in these international stories, and it's really very exciting, the things that he's doing. With that, so he's going to tell us some of those stories and some of the things that he's working on in terms of international LGBTQ human rights.
Great, thank you. And I know some people are coming to Boston, here where I am, to see the Ministerial Fellowship Committee. May it go well for you. For those of you who you're not listening because you're in meetings already, but who will be meeting with them, good luck to you, and thanks for your service. And thanks to all of you. See you next week.
Thank you all.